Good evening. Welcome. Welcome to the Barbershop. Welcome from TikTok as well. So glad to see everybody here at the Barbershop. As you know, we're going to be sharing the show with a couple of folks for the next couple of minutes. So just bear with us. Just hang out with us. Tonight we're talking about dominance. And tonight we're specifically talking about would it be titled the show? I didn't want to tell Cece the title I really wanted to call it. So the topic of the show says, are you really a dominant guy? But what I'm secretly calling the show, Cece. Now, if you don't know, Cece's down below. She's running the ones and twos, making sure that the show gets published properly. Whoops, there we go. My show's actually on Facebook right now, so we're going to share it. But what I'm secretly calling the show is not necessarily are you a dominant guy, but are you a dominant guy or are you an asshole? And moreover, are you being abusive? And so we want to talk about that. Because I think it's really important, and I think it's it's something that we really need to talk about and really define dominance. I'm going to share this on Facebook really quick to make sure that we're sharing it, and then hopefully I can share it. I could probably share it with a couple of folks in my messengers too to make sure that they are watching it. So let me make sure I do that. Let's make sure that that's shared. All right, cool. I don't think we want to share that with my cousin. We're going to talk about some very interesting topics tonight. I want to make sure that we're I don't want to get my family involved. So tonight's topic is are you dominant or are you an asshole? Or moreover, just are you a dominant guy, right? So, of course, the show is brought to you by Bold, Fabuplus, That Professor Life Coaching. It's brought to you by WGSN-DB, Going Solo Network Radio, and Going Bold Wednesday, as well as Going Bold Network. Catch us on Roku. Catch us on all the other places that you can catch. So we're really doing a lot of great stuff. I think, what do we have, like a gajillion impressions now, CC? So many people are finding us. So good question, T. On YouTube, you can just search WGSN-DB. Are you dominant? You'll find it there. You can also just go straight to my stories on Instagram, and you'll see it there as well. So a lot of great stuff going on with me. Teaching's great. Job's great. I'm going to jump into this topic, though, because I feel like we update all these things, and we don't get into the actual topic for about 10 minutes. So I'm going to take a quick, very brief moment of silence. We like to do a moment of silence and or a prayer. So if you're a prayer, you can pray. If you're a moment of silencer, give a moment of silence. Put some positive energy out in the world, and then we're going to get into the topic of the show. So. Okay, and we're good. So again, if you're not a prayer, you can throw out just a moment of silence if that's your thing. Just throw out some positive energy. So what are we talking about today? We're talking about dominance versus potential abuse versus what we're seeing with regard to being a dominant person both in your relationship. We can talk about it being in the bedroom, talk about it being out of the bedroom. We've already got a comment from the Rev Graham. I am dominant when need arises. Other times I am an a-hole, but mostly I am 50-50, and that's fair. It's hard to disseminate, right? the difference between the two. How did this kind of arise? We're going to talk about that in a little bit. I always start my podcast with a couple of movies that can kind of reference dominance and whatever the topic is. So the couple of movies I started with, obviously, we're going to talk about 50 Shades of Grey. Then we're going to talk about that 365 movie, which I think is an absolute joke, even more so than 50 Shades. And then I picked The Godfather. And we're going to talk about The Godfather and why that could be. But I was kind of even talking about Beauty and the Beast. So we're going to start with 50 Shades of Grey. Okay, most people, sorry, I dropped my coaster. Most people, when they hear of like this BDSM dominance, they think 50 Shades of Grey. Now, I couldn't get through most of the book, but I did watch a lot of the movie clips. I also couldn't get through the straight movies. They were just some poorly acted movies. And the reality is that they were fan fiction from a Twilight movie and Twilight book. And to be honest, Twilight's just a much better told story. 50 Shades of Grey has this idea in their brain that this guy and if you really pay attention, I don't even know if he mentioned it, but if you pay attention, this guy Gray, right? This dude learned his BDSM kind of characteristics of dominance through coercion. It was forced upon him, and he very much did the same thing with this woman. And what was the woman's name? And now I'm gonna blank on it. I can't remember. Hold on. 50 Shades Gray characters. What was her name? Cecilia or something like that. I can't. It was like very vanilla. Oh, Dakota. If that's not the whitest woman I've ever heard. Dakota. Hey, what's going on? How are you? Good to see you, Elena. Thanks for coming on again. So, and by the way, if you're on TikTok, feel free to comment. But so he does this thing, right? He is it Anastasia? Oh, it's Dakota Johnson is the actor. I just called her name the whitest name. Sorry. But you've got this guy Christian and then Anastasia, right? And he very much forces this lifestyle upon her. And there's a couple of things that I think there were a lot of women. I don't know that a lot of men watched the movie as much, but there were a lot of women who fantasized. That comment from Jesse we'll talk about in a second, CC, for sure. But there were a lot of women who fantasized about this, and I don't know that they. Gosh, I'm nervous that they forgot a lot of parts of this movie that were very, very much disturbing and challenging, because this guy was in essence a billionaire, right? And he was an attractive guy. And so I think to myself, if this guy, the Rev Graham, gotta go, Chris. We'll catch you later. Hugs. Thank you so much, Rev Graham. I appreciate that. I think to myself, if this guy were, a poor dude, an ugly dude, whatever, would you have thought to fantasize about this guy? Because the way he approached dominance, right, it was not the correct way to come about, and we'll talk about that. Then you jump into this movie 365. 365, I'll be honest, I read the plot after. I couldn't even get through it. If it's not one of the most Stockholm Syndrome, I made a TikTok about it. If it's not the most Stockholm Syndrome type of environment where this woman's kidnapped and then he shoves his finger in her mouth, like in this trying to be dominant way, this guy's an ass, okay? And she grows to love him and love there's these sexy, hot sex scenes and whatever. Worse than 50 Shades of Grey. There was no plot, no getting to know each other. Absolutely terrible. Now, the third movie that I wanted to talk about was The Godfather, because I thought The Godfather, the original Marlon Brando, right, was in essence, right, truly a dominant guy, quiet, confident. When he wanted something done, it got done. He didn't really have to ask for it, right? He just exuded this confidence that a dominant man tends to exude, versus somebody who's all show and peacocking, right? Woo, peacocking, showing off, right? Now, Jesse brings up, you should also add Pretty Women and Goodfellas. Now, I tend to agree with you, and the funniest thing is I almost put Pretty Woman right into that third spot, because Richard Gere, his character was a pretty dominant dude, yeah? And again, quiet, confident, did what he wanted to do, got what he needed to get, but was respectful, right? And all these things. And so the difference between that and, let's say, the 50 Shades or the 365, 50 Shades, at least he gave her plenty of ways to kind of get out of that relationship, right? In 365, he kidnapped her. So we're not even going to count that as you're a dominant guy. You're just a complete jerk, right? So these are the three movies that I tend to kind of focus on when I think about that. But yes, Pretty Woman would absolutely be, kind of in that conversation. So where did this come about, right? So after we go through the three movies, I talk about how this came about in my world and why it came about in that way. And, I see a lot of, maybe it's my algorithm on TikTok, but I see a lot of folks talking about dominance. And there's also this talk about, there's a lot of male podcasters going, oh, I'm an alpha male. I don't need to do nothing. I'm an alpha male. And I have to think to myself, do men, and we're strictly talking about men men being dominant here, and I'll tell you why. Because typically, first of all, you see a lot more men in that dom role, but secondly, you know, a lot of men are more out about that. You know, like they talk about that versus a woman who's like a dominant woman. It's first of all not typically accepted, and not just in the BDSM world, but also, you know, in life, which is crap. But secondly, women don't talk about it because they probably do it correctly. Men will tend to, you know, use that as a filter for just being a jerk, right? So let's see. So Elena says, how to be Fantasyland with one who's in his mom's basement or something. This was good looking, hardworking, taking care of himself, having money. It's easy to go to La La Land in the mind. So obviously talking about 50 Shades of Grey. All right, I could see that, right? But again, you have to take this entire guy in its entirety when you talk about this dominance, because he really wasn't that great of a dominant man. It's at least in the beginning, right? Now, as the plot progressed in 50 Shades of Grey, you start to see him kind of listen to Anastasia more and be more of a partner, and that's where dominance starts. And we're going to talk about that. So if you're not filled in on what dominance means, now you can go and you can Google the phrase dominance, but what it's going to give you is the, you know, power or influence over others, that kind of stuff. That's dominance in life, you know, dominance animal or dominant person. We're talking about in the BDSM world, a DS relationship, capital D, lowercase s kind of relationship. And dominance and submission is a set of behaviors, customs, or rituals involving the submission of one person to another in some sort of an erotic episode or lifestyle. It's a subset of BDSM, right? The DS part of the BDSM, right? And so what you'll start to see are those, you know, those types of things. Now, you'll see, let's say, a couple of phrases. So the phrase that we really want to talk about today, right, is dominance, right? So, and we're specifically talking about male dominance. I don't have much experience with being a female dom, so I couldn't tell you, but maybe we'll have, if you are one and you are truly a subject matter expert, get on the show. Like Jesse says, well, there's also dominant women like Basic Instinct. Yes. So get on the show and let's talk about that. Right. So, you know, how is that defined? It's defined as somebody who submits that other person submits to the will of the dom. Right. And so that's kind of where we're going with this. Now, so many folks think that this is just like, oh, well, you know, if I'm dominant, that means you have to do everything that I say and blah, 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 blah. The reality is that dominant, and it's really more defined as somebody who has authority, right? That authority doesn't come from you being a complete jerk, okay? That authority comes from a place of respect. And the interesting part about that respect is it's got to be earned. So I see this so often. It's one of the reasons that I wanted to do this show, is that so many folks will message me. Now, not self-serving, not trying to be self-serving. I'm not trying to make this about me. I'm truly trying to educate tonight. But I am told off the bat, I tend to have a more dominant personality. I walk into a room, I'm normally not in a t-shirt, I'm in a suit, right? And I tend to dominate a room, but I also tend to dominate a relationship, right? And that doesn't mean that I'm selfish or I take more from, it just means that I dominate that relationship. So you'll see often in my DMs, very often, Sir, Mr., which should be Doctor, let's be real, I'm kidding, Daddy, which is crazy to see that people will actually use that phrase so quickly and so liberally when messaging somebody, because that is a phrase, that is an authoritative connotation that is not to be used lightly. And so I have to wonder to myself, number one, are men taking advantage of that? Number two, why do I have three fingers up? I don't know. Number two, are men in people's inboxes saying, well, call me sir, call me daddy? And I'll bet you it's the latter. I'll bet you people who are labeling themselves as dominants or dom men are in people's inboxes saying, well, address me as sir, address me as daddy, do what I say, blah, 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 blah. And that's utter garbage. It's literal trash garbage because, first of all, speaking as someone who has been ripped apart on the internet, I would never, ever, ever share anything about my sexual lifestyle with someone I didn't trust 1000%. Okay? Especially in writing. Because you're going to leave yourself to a major liability if and when that implodes. It will, because you're messaging people, call me daddy, like a fool, and you don't know who they are. Number 2, the damage that you're doing to that person by demanding those types of things and to yourself is completely irreparable. And it takes so much time for people to come back from that. I'll give you a great example, and let me know, CC, in the private chat if we're taking a break at the 20 hour, please. But I'll give you a great example. I remember, and we'll talk about what this word means, and maybe we should just define it now. Aftercare is when some sort of a scene or sexual event is over. Aftercare is the emotional and physical care that's administered usually by the person who is the dominant or the top. Proper aftercare may be used to prevent what's called a drop, a sub-drop. Now, a sub-drop is going to probably happen no matter what, and it's typically the drop that happens after the bond has been completely gone through and somebody's the scene or the sexual event is over, but you're trying to prevent that drop. You want to continue that bond because it's not just about the dominance during the intercourse, the romance, right? The vulnerability, the sex, right? It's the intimacy after that continues to solidify the relationship. And if you're a lifestyle dom sub where you're continuously lifestyling, right? I'm the dom, you're the sub. I ask, you do, right? Or I tell, you do. There needs to be significant aftercare both during and after any of those events. You know, you need to be able to kind of break character once in a while and people say, hey, honey, baby, whatever your name is that I call you, I need you to know that we're okay. I love you. I respect you. I'm going to treat you like the queen or princess or king or whomever you are to me. Let's make sure that we're doing that properly, right? And so that's what aftercare is. So I'll tell you an example, and then we're going to break because we're going to take a commercial break as per CC and then head over to Instagram. So move over. If you haven't moved over from TikTok to my Instagram stories, you can find us right on YouTube and you can throw out some comments. I want to hear your comments. I'll tell you a great example is, and don't forget, I'm always using amalgrams. This has happened several times, so it's not just one person this has happened to. I had been intimate with a partner, and we were fairly new to one another, and I was providing general aftercare, just general basic aftercare. We didn't even kind of go through, which we should have because I was new. We didn't really go through the steps that we should be taking for aftercare. I was also not as rough as other doms are. So, we didn't need to like get any ice or Advil or anything, but, I was providing some general aftercare, just some cuddles and some talking and some kind of pillow talk. And the person cried. They cried in my arms. And I remember saying to myself, I was like, oh my God, what did I do? And I said to them, I said, are you okay? I said, what have I done? And they said to me, oh, no, I've never been given this before. Typically after I'm intimate with someone physically, they leave immediately or they kick me out of bed immediately. And I go, you've disclosed to me that like our general amount of roughness was like not even close to like what you typically do. She goes, yeah, you're still learning how to be rough. I go, and they just kick you out of bed after that? What if you need something? What if you need a drink of water? What if you need an ice pack? What if you need to be assured that you're a human? And she goes, yeah, they don't, I didn't even know that's a thing. And so aftercare is something that's super, super valuable and necessary when you're a dominant person. And so this all comes to say that I think people are doing this completely wrong. On that note, love the people who are in here on TikTok, but you got to head out. So go right to my Instagram story. You can find my Instagram on my TikTok profile. Head to my Instagram story. And then you can find it right there. And then you can comment on YouTube. And with that, CC, I think we're going to take a break if it's okay with you. And we're going to head to Instagram in a moment. So we'll see y'all soon. You are watching WGSN-DB, Going Solo Network Radio. I am your host of The Barbershop, Dr. Christopher Salute. We are talking about, are you a dominant man or are you a complete and utter a-hole? We will see you soon. Bye. Okay, and we're back. Wanted to make sure that my mic was ready to roll. And you are watching WGSN-DB, Going Solo Network Radio. I'm your host, Dr. Christopher Salute. You're watching The Barbershop. Tonight we're talking about, are you dominant or are you a complete and utter a-hole? So thanks for coming. If you have just joined us from TikTok or Instagram, we welcome you. We welcome you to give us some comments as well. If this is all new for you, you can sit back and relax and enjoy it. We're going to talk about a lot of terminology tonight. We're going to talk about a lot of instances in which we can see dominance versus kind of clear abuse, right? And so if you're just joining the show after the break, don't forget, we're only on Instagram for about 10 minutes, so you can join us actually right after. You can actually join us now. Go to the Instagram story. The link is right there. And then you can comment on YouTube, but feel free to comment on Instagram as well. I'll try to read them. Comment on YouTube. Let us know. And let me know if I'm totally off, right? I mean, this is all a learning process. What we love about the Barbershop Show, the Going Solo Network, the Going Bold Network, and even my other network as well, is I'm all about learning, right? And as a professor, I pride myself on taking information as well as giving it, right? I don't think that we're in a position where we're all, I'm the subject matter expert on these things. And I always say this too. I'm learning my own dominant traits and all those types of things. And I want to make sure that other people are learning and growing as well. So we were just kind of talking about how this came about and men kind of thinking they're dominant and being stupid and going into people's inboxes and saying I'm daddy and blah, 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 and all that kind of stuff. So I've done a little research and there's a lot of, so we're going to get towards the very end, we're going to get towards dominance versus abuse. But I thought this was a great article. And I'm going to be honest, I don't think it was like, we're not talking about, a wonderfully written, white research paper. And a white paper, by the way, is a research article that is backed by scientific data, right? So, but look, I'm going to be real with you. It's from liveboldandbloom.com. So take that information from what you will, right? But it says the 11 traits of a dominant person. And it resonated with me because I really liked it. The first one, and we may not even get through all 11 because there's other articles I want to bring into this conversation, but the first one is he exhibits self-control and self-discipline. And I want to talk about that first and foremost as probably one of the most important characteristics as somebody who is saying that they are dominant. Too many men are folks who enjoy the idea of being served and being in control, but they themselves don't have the self-control and discipline to be dominant. Now, I will say this. Now, I trashed 50 Shades of Grey on TikTok and earlier on YouTube. I will say this. There was a scene in the book, and I think they replicated it in the movie. I'll be honest, the movie was terrible. He gets up early to make breakfast, start his day. I remember he winds up cooking Anastasia breakfast, and then he starts his day and gets to work. And I remember thinking to myself, at least they got that right for two reasons. One is Christian Grey's his schedule was very important to him because he had self-discipline, right? Number one. The other thing that I liked about him, we call this kind of a service dominant trait or a service dominant activity or event, is he either cooked for her or he had his chef cook for Anastasia. Also very important, right? Because as somebody who is, if you're going to be dominant, right, there are certain parts of that dominance that you need not neglect, and I think a lot of men do, is that not just aftercare, but taking care of your partner. When you're a dominant person, right, the whole point of being dominant, right? Okay, so Craig Capine says his maid cooked for them. Okay, that's fair. But he still got up early. And he still made sure she ate. And that, I think, is a pivotal part of this conversation because when you're a dominant person, dominance comes from the idea that you can control a situation without having to control the situation verbally or with your body, right? So there are types of dominance in which, okay, we're going to tie you up and we're going to do the thing and that's cool, right? But typically, one of my favorite quotes from my friend Timmery is a lion doesn't walk into the room and calls themselves a lion, right? Typically, you're able to have that level of control and discipline as a dominant man without having to ask for it too often, unless you're in a brat situation. We could have probably a whole series on this. But what does that mean? Well, it means that you've taken care of your partner in such a way that they don't want to leave that room. They don't want to be without you. They want what you have to show them and give to them. and they trust that you're going to do it in a way that's going to be of value and in kindness and in safety, because you have never exhibited something otherwise. So in that 50 Shades of movie, he does a great job of having the self-discipline, getting up in the morning, making sure she's fed her breakfast. That's not a bad thing, right? So the other part of this in Live Bold and Bloom, he knows and uses the power of body language. Very, very similar, right? So similar to that kind of self-control conversation, he uses body language properly. And I think that that's really important to note. Again, if you're just joining, I hate 50 Shades of Grey. I think it's the worst, probably one of the worst books ever written, the trilogy. I don't know how they got 3 books out of it, and I don't know how they got 3 movies out of it, but I will say this, they got a couple of those things right. Now, if you tend to see some of the other movies and books that I talked about with regard to body language, for example, The Godfather or Pretty Woman, 2 very dominant men, and we could talk about Al Pacino. He was dominant, but he also was peacocking a little bit in the way that he exuded his dominance or exhibited it. But in Pretty Woman and The Godfather, you see very dominant men using their body language in such a way that lets you know the folks in the room need to do what I say, not because I'm going to tell them, but because they rely on me socioeconomically. They rely on me. In such a way, I mean, like The Godfather was responsible for an entire economic system. So like the people around him weren't going to rebel, right? And the people who were his enemies weren't going to fight him because they probably relied on him too, or they were afraid of him, right? The other part of this, the third, and we'll probably leave this article in a second, the 3 most important were the body language, the idea that you have structure. But the third that I love, are you dominant, right, from Live Bold and Bloom, is he knows he's a work in progress and he does the work. Now, I absolutely love that, okay? Because somebody who is in a dominant sub kind of relationship, or just dominant in general, right, will always be of growth mindset. They're not going to be in a situation where they are the end-all be-all subject matter expert of everything and anything and they know it all. They are always going to be in a situation, always put themselves in a situation where if they don't know something, they're going to learn it. And if they're learning it, they're going to let you know that they're going to improve. And if they've done something wrong, they're going to make sure that you're compensated and righted, whether it's compensated, a give and take where you get to do something that you wanted to do, or that you're compensated by for whatever reason, or whether it's aftercare or something like that, or understanding or a conversation, right? And then they're going to move into a place that that they're going to grow from. So I think that's really important. There are some other ones. He knows what he wants. He's patient but relentless. He takes risks. All these things are part of this. This article, but I think those are the most important ones that we took away from this article. Now, there's another great article, 21. You should just Google this because I'm not going to have time to read it. But 21 erotic films hotter than the vanilla shitstorm that is 50 Shades of Grey and 50 Shades Darker. And that, I think, is a great article. It's on InsideHook.com. So definitely take a look at that. Just Google movies better than 50 Shades, because the other part of that conversation is the conversation that they had, or the relationship they had was very vanilla. It really didn't hit the BDSM, the DS kind of relationship that we tend to see in true dominant relationships. So Allie says, I want to clarify the phrasing of being dominant and being a dominant. Yes, very important. You can successfully be dominant while being abusive. The article A makes a huge difference. I think that's really important to note, Allie, and I appreciate you bringing that up. And as noted, I'm growing and learning, right? So you can be a dominant person, but being a dominant is a very different kind of situation. And to her end, being dominant doesn't necessarily mean being a dom. But here's what I want to clarify, and this is the problem in this conversation, Allie, is that most men think that when they are dominating, they are a dom or a dominant. And that's the problem, is they're forgetting all of the nurturing, all of the things that need to happen. The other part of it is we as men don't truly understand what it means to be dominant, right? You could hit your chest and yell at people and fight, and you can force people to your will and blah, 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 blah. That's not really being dominant, and it's not having a dominant personality. It's kind of just, like I said, peacocking, and it's showing someone that you've got the ability to do whatever it is that you want to do. The reality is it's a short-lived event that will probably end up in a loss anyway, right? Being truly dominant forget the A and forget the capital D that Ali had mentioned. Being truly dominant, typically, and I'll disagree with you. It depends. I'm going to disagree with you for the moment. We can debate this, Ali. If you're truly dominant in a dominant situation and you take pride in your dominance of a room or dominance and control of whomever is around, I believe, and this is a personal opinion, I'm not a sex therapist, so don't take it from me, but let's just talk about dominance in the true word of, just dominating a situation. You typically are dominating in a way that draws people into you, does not ostracize, hurt, or harm them. Now, to Ali's point, yeah, you can dominate and hurt. You can dominate and abuse. But a dom definitely does not abuse, hurt, or harm, right? They may hurt, pain, but that's part of the scene or part of the relationship, right? To that end, love you, Instagram. I feel like I'm looking down too much, and I apologize. If you are on Instagram watching, just check us out. Go right onto my story. You can comment on YouTube, be part of the conversation. Tell us about your experiences. You are watching WGSN-DB, Going Solo Network Radio. I'm your host, Dr. Christopher Salute. We're talking about dominance versus a-holism. So we'll see you soon. We're just going to save that real quick. A couple of friends were on there that I haven't talked to in a while. Are you dominant or an a-hole? And we'll put that in there. We're going to invite a collaborator. Oh, I love that. We can put that right on to my other page, which is great. Oh, I didn't even know you could do that. See, we're just learning Instagram every day. We're going to add that to our barbershop series. Sorry, folks. I'll be with you in a second. I'm going to share it. Cool. So now it'll be up. So I love that, to Ali's point, right? But now to be a dominant is very different, right? And so I think it's important to note, right? So when you go over to a lot of these, DS, BDSM kind of dictionaries or thesauruses or terminology websites, this one's on everydayhealth.com. They say, to your end, dominance and submission. Dominance, a term for the behaviors or rituals that a submissive person follows in a BDSM relationship. In DS, one person usually has power for the other. So that's where the authority comes in. But a dominant is a person who has that authority, right? And there's also two types of dominance that we need to talk about, right? There's dominance in the bedroom, and there's dominance in life. See, there are some folks who enjoy that lifestyle 24/7, or at least part of their lives being that dominant kind of thing. So you might hear somebody who's a dominant request or suggest or command that you say, please, sir, when you do something, or that, when you're suggesting something, or when, let's say your spouse says something like, well, you should have known, blah, 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 blah. And they might say, excuse me? Sorry, sir. What I meant to say was that, I noted before this event happened that blah, 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 and I'm sure you saw it, but you didn't act on it properly. And I'm wondering why that is. And perhaps you could fix that in the future, that kind of thing. Right. So, it's really important to note that there is a distinction between the bedroom and the lifestyle, right? Because you could be a lifestyle dominant, and it's something that really takes over your life. So we've spent some time kind of talking about what denotes dominance, right? And what denotes a dominant, right? But as we talked about during the beginning of the show, it's the theme of the show is, are you truly a dominant, or are you abusive, or are you a jerk, or are you whatever? And the question remains, what is the difference? And I would characterize the difference. There's a couple of differences, right? The few differences are, number one, it stems from that conversation we started the show off with. It all begins with establishing a relationship of trust. So when someone's in your inbox calling you daddy or asking you to call them daddy, right off the bat, you can probably rest assured they are not a dominant. They're not a dominant person. When you need to request that off the bat, you're typically looking for a loyalty that you cannot establish. Because if you could establish it, you'd be patient and you'd understand. Now, the other part of it is people are constantly learning and growing. So this could be a baby dom. This could be somebody who's truly learning. So I don't want to take that away. But hopefully they've done enough research prior to engaging in that kind of conversation to note that you just don't do that right away, right? So if somebody's in your inbox saying, hey, daddy, or if somebody's in your inbox saying, I need you to call me daddy, their odds are I'm going to bet 98% they will probably never truly achieve a dominant, submissive kind of lifestyle because they are looking for it too soon. What needs to happen is a relationship of trust, because when you are in that kind of DS role, right, dominant, submissive role, you're going to see and feel a lot of new things that will enhance both your intimacy, physical, and then your intimacy, non-physical, right? Depending on how much of the relationship you bleeds into your, how much of the dominance and submissiveness bleeds into your life. But even if it doesn't, the level of intimacy that you're experiencing when you're in a dom-sub relationship is going to be enhanced. I would imagine, otherwise, why engage in that scenario, right? Why engage in that type of intimacy? If you're doing that, if you're going to that extent and truly experiencing your partner in that dominant, submissive type of way, and we could probably do 3 shows on this. I mean, the faith, the trust, the loyalty that are involved with those things. I see you, Allie. I'm going to answer you in a second. You're going to see a distinction between what you were feeling and what you're now feeling. That creates a lot of energy that's both very positive, but leaves you very vulnerable, both as the dominant and the submissive, right? So the trust and loyalty that you're going to need to have with somebody before you do that, very, very strong. Now, Allie says, I think the distinction is made very clear when you see someone who is more dominant in everyday life, but chooses to submit to certain, I'm guessing, to certain activities. Yeah, and I think you can see that. So there are a lot of folks who are dominant in everyday life who prefer to be submissive in the bedroom or prefer to be submissive at home. Probably the best situation, I don't know why I didn't think of this one, and it's a female dom, the show Billions, right? So you see Chuck Rhodes, who's the district attorney. He's a very dominant man. He's a politician. He takes down these bad guys. He's strong and he's forthright and all these other things. But when he gets home, his wife is the dominant in the relationship, yeah? Both in the bedroom and in kind of lifestyle a little bit. Well, no, I'm going to say not. They're very equal partners, or they try to be, throughout their relationship. It's really in the bedroom that she takes on that dominance role. But that's to Allie's point, where you see true dominance, not, as the difference between dominance and submissive, right? But it's true. And I guess my blind side is that I'm dominant in life and also tend to be dominant in my relationships, right? So T says, if we could bring that up for a second, so many conversations need to be had before entering into the lifestyle, and I 1000% agree. So if you're engaging in that lifestyle before you actually have that trust and loyalty conversation, you're probably doing it wrong. In fact, you're definitely doing it wrong, right? So that's number one. Somebody who enters in too quickly is probably going to be somebody who's abusive, right? Number 2. Now there are 1,001 ways to dominate, right? To be a dominant. But what you'll find is communication in any way, shape, or form. Now, we've talked about poly relationships. We've talked about all sorts of relationships, and we've talked about communication being extremely, extremely important, right? Paramount right now. When you're engaging in a dominant submissive relationship, communication is without a doubt the number 1, 2, and 3 thing you need to be a dom, right? Is to actively communicate. Communicate about what your needs are. Ask your partner what their needs are. Make sure that your needs are aligned. First of all, asking a question like, do you submit? Are you a submissive? Are you open to that? Is it something that you fantasize about? Is it something that you've wanted to do? If it's not those things, then what are we doing here? It's very difficult to turn somebody who has no desire to be a submissive into a submissive, number one. But if they have no desire to be a submissive, you probably shouldn't be engaging in that activity anyway. Now, there is the rare circumstance where somebody doesn't know enough about the lifestyle and yada, 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 and so you can do that, right? But clear communication is absolute paramount. And I say this, and I will say this until I'm blue in the face, and I wish that I could put this more on the internet, but I have a professional life that I try to keep separate from these types of conversations. But having these conversations is so important, number one. Number 2, and if you are in a DS relationship, or if you have experience in that kind of lifestyle and you don't agree with this, I'm going to challenge you on it, but I think you'll agree. Everyone thinks, if you're not in that kind of lifestyle, that dominants are strong and submissives are weak. Now, if you want to get ahead of me and put a comment up and tell me what I'm about to say, you go ahead and I'll read it. But you're probably not going to type as quickly as I can speak. In actuality, 1001%, in any DS relationship, the strength comes from the submissive. The strength comes from the person being dominated by the dominant. Let me explain why that is. Okay? The number one reason, the most obvious reason, is that Dom's power derives from his or her ability, but here we're talking about men, their ability to earn the respect, trust, loyalty, and in kind submissiveness of their partner. If they have not earned that, if their submissive does not give them the opportunity and ability to dominate them, the dominant has no true power or strength. That's number one. Number two is that a dominant tends to be dominant and need and want that control at first. And I would hope that they power through this and learn about themselves. But you tend to be dominant. And you can fight me on this one too. It's in some literature. I don't know if there's some data, but we'll look it up. Now, the dominant tends to be dominant and need that control because they've got an insecurity that they are covering up for, as all folks do, right? And so there's a weakness there that's being hidden by the dominance. Now, Megan says this: I'd say there are three aspects to dominance. A personality trait, being dominant. B, an expression of identity, lifestyle dominance. And then C, a role one performs, bedroom doms. Agreed. And I think if you can, the same can be applied to submissive. Absolutely. I think if you were to parcel it out into a tree diagram, you'd say dominance, you'd go sexually or lifestyle, and then like just life, right? Not non-sexual, right? Then of that tree, in the bedroom, out of the bedroom, right? Lifestyle and in the bedroom. So that's what I tend to think, right? I think unless you're a switch, very rare on that other side of the tree would you see somebody who's dominant in the bedroom, but then very submissive in the relationship. You may see somebody who's submissive or dominant in life and then submissive in both the bedroom and in lifestyle. But usually one would extend from the other is what I'm trying to say, right? So anyway, the third thing I would say about dominant folks being weaker actually than submissive folks is that, remember, number one is that the dom derives their true strength from the submissive wanting and being able to submit. Number two is there's probably an insecurity there that they're controlling the need for, that they're hiding the need for from being controlling. But number three is the trust given from a submissive to a dominant is very strong. And so that's why I would say the submissive is typically stronger than the dominant, because they're giving of themselves in a way that they are truly vulnerable. In the relationships that I've had, I remember asking, are you okay with this? Is this okay? And they go, I trust you 1000%. It's okay. It's okay. And I'm like, oh, are you sure? Because I'm still learning, but they trust you. Right. And so I think that's really important. Now we can even set up 3A and B would be the idea that in many dominant submissive relationships, there's a lot of pain that's administered, whether it be baby pain or heavy pain. And so typically a dominant doesn't receive that pain. So they're not going to, that's also a sign of the strength of the submissive. But the reason that I excluded that from the three reasons is because it's not an overall 100% characteristic of a dominant submissive relationship. It's not at all. So it's important to think about that, right? So that's why we talk about, dominant and abusive, being dominant men not being abusive, because they're asking for the opportunity to do this, not taking it, right? T says you're giving up their will. The trust must be 100%. I agree with that 1000%. And I will say this as well. The other aspect of how you're not with a dominant, you're with an abuser, is that one of the first things I thought of when I coach clients too is, and we'll talk about this because it's a great article from healthfully.com. Are you with a dominant or are you with an abuser? Abusers don't have communication skills enough to ask for A, the consent necessary to do what they're going to do, and B, a plan B and or exit strategy if things go wrong. i.e. a safe word. So many folks that I've spoken to have said, yeah, I was in the DS relationship. He didn't believe in safe words. A safe word is not something to believe in. That's like saying I don't believe in dirt. Okay, dirt exists. It's outside. Safe words exist, and they exist for a reason. There is no way, shape, or form you can have a true vulnerable dom-sub relationship with the strength and loyalty that are necessary to create that bond needed to have what you're going to have if you do not have an exit strategy or a safe word. At any given point, you should be asking, breaking character as often as needed, right? And saying, are you okay with this? Is this good for you, right? Now, as you get to know somebody, right, there's things like consenting, non-consent, right? There's also just getting to know your partner. But having those true conversations are super important to move forward. And having that true safe word is really important. Now, people will say my safe word is blueberry pancakes or Wolfie from Wolf of Wall Street, whatever it's going to be. But that brings up this great article that I found from healthfully.com, Dominant versus Abuse. Okay, and I want to highlight a couple of the points that it makes. Okay, so some couples enjoy experimenting, but some folks are in abusive relationships. So the first thing they talk about is negotiation and consent. So when you're having tea to that end, this important conversation that you're having, right, it typically is going to be some sort of consent negotiation, right? What does that consent negotiation look like? It's very transactional and could be even contractual, right? I'm going to tell you what it is that I like. You're going to tell me what it is that you like, and we're going to find the Venn diagram that they meet at. Now, if I like something that you don't like, but you'll tolerate, okay, we can think about that. If you like something that I don't like, but I'll tolerate, we can think about that. But if you adamantly don't like something and I love it, and it doesn't meet in the Venn diagram, well, guess what? And you can't tolerate it. It doesn't go in the diagram. And that's where this consent negotiation starts to happen, right? So what needs to start happening is you start to have these conversations that are truly important, right? This next thing that they talk about, right? Contact with friends and family could be limited if your dom is not a dom, if they're an abuser. And I love this part of the article. A dom who cares about their sub. Oh, now that's very interesting. This article says a dom who cares about her sub wants to help him discover who he really is. So this is a gender reversal from what I'm talking about. Who he really is, both in and outside of the relationship. If your partner has isolated you from your friends and family against your will, that's abuse. And I think while that's an important part, I mean, that's an easy indicator of any abusive relationship, I think it's important to note that a dominant truly wants what's best for their partner. They want to see them grow, be strong, be wonderful, and see them flourish and all these great things. They would never put them in a situation where they were isolated or felt less than. And that goes into the next point. They talk about safety, which I'll skip over because we talked about the safe word. But shame and self-esteem. In an abusive relationship, the self-esteem of a submissive partner is eroded or destroyed. He does not trust the dominant partner, or she does not trust the dominant partner. And that's where I think we see a huge difference. When we talk about aftercare and self-esteem, I think that's where the major differences will be between someone who's dominant and someone who's abusive. Because a lot of the acts could be very similar, yeah? You'll see, oh, well, this happened, that happened. There was some striking. There was some pain. He commanded me to get them a drink of water. All these things could be abusive and they could be dominant. Now, the difference is what happens before and after that event takes place. Number one, am I asking for your consent, negotiating, talking about safe words, building your trust, getting all these things that need to happen, assuring you that you are my world, my everything, you're my person, right? Maybe not my everything, right? But my person, right? And then afterwards, am I telling you how great you are, how important it is that we have this relationship, how much I value you, making sure that you have a life outside of this relationship, all those types of things, right? And so those are some of the major differences I think that the article highlighted. So we're coming up on 50 minutes, and I know Cece, if I haven't checked the chat yet, is going to yell at me for, not keeping within our time. But in a nutshell, and I think we're going to probably have to do this more because there are so many aspects of the DS Dom sub relationship that we haven't really talked about. For example, faith being something really important, right? It actually, this DS kind of relationship is rooted in faith and joint kind of gender roles that have derived from our most basic and primal understanding of what the genders do. Now, what we also need to do is then reverse that and say, now, if you're a female dom and a male sub, what does that look like? Not to say that it doesn't include faith at all, but where does that go, right? We want to talk about different types of DOMs, right? Like, different types of subs, those types of things, those types of relationships. And we also want to talk about the actions and activities that take place both in and out of the bedroom when you're a lifestyler versus just a bedroom dom versus a bedroom or lifestyle sub. So maybe we should talk about that in a sequel. But on that note, I want to thank everybody for coming on to the show tonight. I know it was a pretty, kind of vulnerable, tricky subject we're talking about here, right? Talking about dominance versus submission. Are you a dominant person? My name's Dr. Christopher Salute. You're watching WGSN-DB, Going Solo Network Radio. I'm your host of the Barbershop. You're watching Going Bold Wednesday on the Going Bold Network. We love you. We love to hear from you. That is the show for tonight. Thanks for coming on.